It was an ordinary evening in the city. People hustling down the sidewalk, the glow of streetlights casting long shadows on the pavement, and the hum of distant traffic weaving through the air. For Officer Marcus Grant, it was just another shift in a city that never seemed to stop moving. Little did he know that tonight, his routine would be shattered by a single, seemingly innocent man. Marcus and his partner, Officer Rachel Hayes, cruised through the streets in their patrol car, scanning the area for anything out of the ordinary. They were used to handling typical disturbances, disputes, petty thefts, and the occasional traffic stop. But tonight, something felt different. The air was thick with tension, though neither officer could pinpoint why. As they rounded a corner, Marcus's sharp eyes caught sight of a man walking briskly down the street, his gaze darting nervously. He was dressed in a simple jacket and jeans, but there was something unsettling about the way he moved. Too anxious, too aware of his surroundings. Marcus instinctively hit the brakes, pulling the patrol car to a stop. "Stay alert," Marcus muttered to Rachel as he stepped out of the car, his hand hovering near his holstered gun. Rachel followed suit, but there was a question in her eyes. Why this man? He didn't seem like the kind of person who would typically attract attention. Still, Marcus had a hunch. "Hey you!" Marcus called out as he approached the man, who immediately stiffened. His eyes widened, and he hesitated before turning around slowly, his expression a mixture of fear and confusion. "Is there a problem, officer?" the man asked, his voice shaking. He was in his early 30s with disheveled brown hair and a look of someone who hadn't expected his day to take this turn. Marcus studied him for a moment, then glanced at Rachel, who was already observing the man with a critical eye. Something wasn't right. She didn't say it, but she felt it too. The man was too nervous, almost as if he had something to hide. "I'm going to need to ask you some questions," Marcus said, his tone steady but firm. "Please step over here." The man hesitated but complied, his movements cautious as he glanced back at Rachel. "What's this about?" he asked, his voice growing more anxious. "Just some routine questioning," Marcus said, his mind already working through possible scenarios, but he wasn't prepared for what would come next. As Marcus moved to place the man against the patrol car, Rachel's voice broke through the tension. "Wait," she said, her voice tight with urgency. "Marcus, do you know who this is?" Marcus turned to her, brow furrowed in confusion. What was she talking about? Rachel was scanning the man's face with a look of realization. "I know who he is," she said. "We need to release him right now." Marcus froze, but before he could react, Rachel grabbed his arm and pulled him aside, her face pale with shock. "This is Samuel Pierce," she whispered, the words hitting Marcus like a ton of bricks. "The key witness to the Maxwell case. If we detain him any longer, we're going to ruin everything." The name hit Marcus like a freight train. Samuel Pierce. The name had been floating in the background of his mind, a fleeting reference in a briefing, an important piece of the puzzle in a case that had been dominating headlines for weeks. But Marcus hadn't realized the significance of the man standing in front of him, until now. Samuel Pierce wasn't just any ordinary man. He was the key witness in the Maxwell case, a high-profile investigation into a corrupt business empire and its ties to organized crime. The case was being handled at the highest levels of law enforcement, with federal agencies and the media all fixated on the trial. The Maxwell family, with their vast network of businesses, had been accused of money laundering, trafficking, and other illegal activities. Samuel Pierce was the man who held the answers. He had witnessed crucial events that could bring down the entire organization. But here he was, standing in front of Marcus and Rachel, caught in what appeared to be a simple traffic stop gone wrong. And now, after just a few minutes, everything had spiraled into chaos. "Wait, he's the witness?" Marcus asked, his voice hoarse. "Why didn't you tell me earlier?" Rachel's face was pale, her mind racing. "I didn't recognize him at first, but now, I see it. I should have known." This could jeopardize the entire investigation. The weight of the situation was settling in, and Marcus's stomach churned with the realization. He had just detained a man who held the fate of countless lives in his hands. If word got out that Samuel Pierce had been detained by the police, the ripple effect could destroy the integrity of the investigation. The Maxwell family would use this as leverage, and the case could collapse before it even reached trial. Rachel pulled out her phone, her fingers trembling as she quickly dialed a number. "We need to call in a higher-up now," she said, her voice urgent. "This needs to be handled by someone who knows what they're doing." Marcus watched as she spoke rapidly into the phone, explaining the situation. She ended the call, her face grim. "We're going to have to release him immediately, but we can't let anyone know what happened here." "Not yet." Rachel's words were a cold reminder of the stakes at play. Samuel Pierce wasn't just a civilian caught in the wrong place at the wrong time. He was the thread that could unravel everything, if he wasn't protected properly. "I'll let him go," Marcus said, his voice still low with disbelief. "But Rachel, this is big. If we mess this up, it could cost more than just our careers." "I know," she replied, her tone steady, despite the storm brewing around them. "We need to make sure nothing leaks, nothing gets out. We can't afford to lose him." Marcus nodded, the reality of their mistake settling in. He turned back to Samuel, who was still standing there, looking confused and uneasy. "I'm sorry for the inconvenience," Marcus said, his voice strained but sincere. "But we made a mistake. You're free to go." Samuel didn't immediately respond. He seemed bewildered, almost relieved. I don't understand. What's going on? Why the detention? What is this about?" Rachel stepped forward. "We'll explain everything later," she said softly, giving him a reassuring nod. "But right now, you need to leave the area. Go somewhere safe. And don't tell anyone where you're going." Samuel hesitated, his gaze flickering between Marcus and Rachel. But then he seemed to understand. He gave a brief nod, his eyes still wide with confusion and concern. Without another word, he turned and walked away, disappearing into the night. As the two officers watched him go, neither spoke for a moment. The silence was heavy, filled with the weight of what had just transpired. They had just made a dangerous mistake, and the consequences of that mistake could be far-reaching. "What now?" Marcus finally asked. "We wait," Rachel replied, her voice steady but her mind clearly racing. "And we pray that nothing goes wrong." The quiet after Samuel Pierce's departure was deafening. Marcus and Rachel stood side by side, their gazes fixed on the empty street where the key witness to a major case had just vanished into the night. In that moment, the weight of the decisions they had just made started to sink in. Everything they had worked for, everything they had built in their careers, could come crumbling down if they didn't act fast. Marcus couldn't help but replay the events in his mind. How had they missed it? How had he, a seasoned officer, failed to recognize the significance of the man standing in front of him? It wasn't just a simple case of mistaken identity. It was a colossal screw-up that could cost them both their jobs and perhaps their freedom. "Rachel, this is bigger than we thought," Marcus said, his voice tight with anxiety. "The Maxwell case. It's not just about money laundering and trafficking. This is a war. If we mess up here, it could spiral into something much worse." Rachel's jaw tightened as she glanced back toward the darkened streets. "I know, and the timing couldn't be worse. We've already seen the first signs of leaks from the inside, and now this. If anyone catches wind of this incident, it could compromise the entire investigation." The truth of the situation hit her hard. Samuel Pierce wasn't just a witness. He was a symbol, a crucial piece of evidence that could bring down one of the most dangerous criminal syndicates in the country. The fact that he had been detained by the very police force trying to protect him was a huge risk. They couldn't let anyone, especially the Maxwells, know what had happened. "Rachel," Marcus started again, his voice now low and measured. "We need to make sure nothing leaks. That means no one outside this precinct can know about this." Rachel nodded, her mind already racing with a plan. "I'll call in some favors," she said, her voice steady despite the tension in the air. "We need to make sure Samuel is safe, and that he's moved to a secure location. No one can know where he is. And we need to act quickly." Marcus felt a surge of urgency. They had already made one mistake, and he wasn't about to let any more happen. "I'll back you up, whatever it takes." But even as they spoke, Marcus felt the gnawing feeling in his gut, the nagging sense that they were running out of time. The longer they waited, the greater the risk of something going wrong. The Maxwells had eyes everywhere. They would be watching, and if they even suspected that Samuel had been compromised, it could mean the end of everything. "We need to get ahead of this," Marcus said, determination setting into his voice. "And we need to make sure no one else knows about the detention. Not even the higher-ups." Rachel gave him a sharp look. "You're suggesting we keep this from our superiors?" Marcus didn't flinch. "If we tell them, the whole department will be in on it. And if the word leaks from one person, just one person, it could be catastrophic. We need to take control of this ourselves." Rachel hesitated for a moment, her brow furrowing in thought. Then, after a long silence, she finally nodded. "You're right. We handle this quietly. No one else gets involved. At least not yet. They both knew the danger they were facing. The Maxwells were powerful, with connections that stretched far beyond the city. If word got out that Samuel Pierce had been detained, it wouldn't just be a small scandal. It would be the end of the investigation. The mob would cover their tracks, and any hope of bringing down the criminal organization would be gone. "All right," Rachel said, pulling her phone from her pocket once more. "Let's start making calls. We'll move him under the radar and make sure no one knows where he's going." Marcus nodded and began scanning the area, his instincts on high alert. He wasn't sure how much time they had, but he knew that every second counted. Marcus and Rachel moved quickly, the clock ticking down on their precarious situation. Every decision they made felt like it could either save their careers or destroy them. With the Maxwells already watching every move they made, there was no room for error. Rachel made a few calls, her voice low and precise, orchestrating a plan that would keep Samuel Pierce off the radar. She contacted trusted allies within the department who owed her favors, ensuring that the move would happen without a hitch. As she hung up the phone, she turned to Marcus with a grave look. "It's done," she said. "Samuel's been placed in a safe house. But it's not going to be easy to keep him there. The Maxwells have a way of tracking down people when they want to, and their reach goes further than we can imagine." Marcus clenched his fists. "We're running out of options. If the Maxwells find out, we're finished. It won't just be Samuel in danger. It'll be all of us." Rachel didn't respond immediately. She had seen what the Maxwells were capable of. They were ruthless, their network vast, their influence terrifying. They wouldn't hesitate to eliminate anyone who stood in their way. She had witnessed firsthand how their power could destroy lives. "You're right," she said finally, "but we can't afford to wait. We have to act now, before they realize that Samuel is the key witness. We'll keep him under wraps and hope for the best, but we need to move fast." Marcus felt his stomach tighten. He had always known that his job was dangerous, but he hadn't imagined it would get this bad. The Maxwells were notorious for their ability to dig up dirt on people, and now they were after someone who knew everything about them. Samuel Pierce wasn't just a random witness. He was the missing piece in a puzzle that could bring their empire crashing down. "Where's the safest place to move him?" Marcus asked, trying to maintain some semblance of control over the situation. "There's a location outside the city, a safe house we've used before. It's off the grid, completely isolated," Rachel explained. "But it won't stay safe for long. If the Maxwells have any inkling that we've got their witness, they'll stop at nothing to find him." Marcus nodded grimly. "Then we'll make sure no one finds out. Not a single person. We can't risk it." As they prepared to move Samuel to the new location, the realization of how deep they were in began to hit them. This wasn't just about one mistake or a minor slip-up. It was about everything they had worked for. The Maxwell Syndicate wasn't just a local problem. They had connections that reached into every part of the city, every corner of the law enforcement community. "Rachel," Marcus said, his voice low, "what if we're being watched right now? What if the Maxwells have already caught wind of us?" Rachel paused, her expression hardening. She had considered the possibility, but it was a risk she didn't want to acknowledge. "We have to trust the people we're working with. If they've got the same stake in this as we do, they'll cover their tracks." Marcus wasn't sure. The more they tried to stay one step ahead, the more they felt like they were walking a tightrope. One wrong move and everything would come crashing down. The hours dragged on, and the tension was suffocating. Marcus and Rachel had made their move securing Samuel in the safe house, but they both knew that the real danger was just beginning. Every decision from here on out could tip the scales, either securing their safety or exposing them to the wrath of the Maxwell family. The streets outside were dark, but the silence was anything but peaceful. Marcus kept checking his phone, his nerves on edge as he scanned for any messages from their inside contacts. Rachel was just as focused, flipping through the case files they'd gathered on the Maxwells, desperately trying to find a new lead. Anything that could give them the upper hand. "What's the next step?" Marcus asked, breaking the silence as he paced the small room they designated as their temporary command center. Rachel didn't look up from the files, but her eyes narrowed with determination. "We get to the root of this. Samuel knows everything about the Maxwell's operation, but we need to make sure the evidence is solid. Without proof, we've got nothing. If we don't bring them down now, we're all dead." Marcus nodded, feeling the weight of the truth in her words. They had no backup plan. This was all or nothing. Their careers, their lives, and Samuel's fate rested on one crucial fact. Could they get the hard evidence they needed before the Maxwells found them? But the more Marcus thought about it, the more questions he had. Was their entire operation compromised? Had someone tipped off the Maxwells about their investigation? The sinking feeling in his gut told him that they were being watched. They were not the only ones keeping tabs on Samuel. Rachel's voice snapped him out of his thoughts. "We need to go in, Marcus. We need to find the files, get the proof, and end this once and for all." She had a point. The longer they waited, the more dangerous it became. But as they gathered their things, preparing to leave the safe house, the realization hit Marcus like a freight train. They couldn't trust anyone, not even those closest to them. The Maxwells had connections everywhere, and their reach seemed endless. As they moved swiftly through the dark streets, Marcus felt a cold shiver run down his spine. They were heading straight into the lion's den, with no guarantee they'd come out alive. Every turn, every shadow could be a sign of danger, but they had no choice. The air was thick with tension as Marcus and Rachel moved through the alleyways, their footsteps echoing against the cold concrete. The city around them was alive, but in their small corner of the world, everything felt silent, deadly silent. Every movement had to be calculated, every word spoken in whispers. Samuel was their only lead, and the closer they got to the truth, the closer they were to the precipice of disaster. They arrived at a nondescript building, one that looked no different from the dozens of others lining the industrial district. But to Rachel, this was it. The key to everything. Inside, the Maxwells were running their operations, and inside was the evidence they needed to take them down. They had made contact with a source who promised to help them break in without triggering alarms. But Marcus wasn't so sure. "Are we sure about this?" Marcus asked quietly, his voice low as they approached the door. Rachel didn't answer immediately. Her eyes were scanning the perimeter, looking for any signs of surveillance. "We don't have a choice, Marcus. If we wait any longer, they'll come for us. We need that evidence now, before the Maxwells get wind of it." Marcus nodded, but his instincts were screaming at him to be cautious. His partner's mind was sharp, but he couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. It was too easy, too perfect. They had no idea how deep the Maxwells' influence reached, but as the hairs on the back of his neck stood up, he feared they were about to find out the hard way. The door opened with a faint click, and Rachel motioned for him to follow. They moved inside, their footsteps muffled by the thick carpet that lined the hallway. The building felt eerily empty. Too empty. Marcus was used to the sound of bustling activity in places like this, but there was none of that here. Only the quiet hum of the air conditioning and the distant clatter of metal. They were halfway down the hallway when Marcus saw it, the faint shadow of a figure slipping around the corner. His heart skipped a beat. He was sure they were not alone. Before he could say anything, Rachel grabbed his arm, her grip firm. "Stay low," she whispered, "and keep your eyes open." Suddenly, the sharp sound of footsteps echoed in the distance, growing louder with each passing second. Marcus and Rachel exchanged a glance. The trap had been set, and they had walked right into it. They needed to act fast, before the Maxwell family's wrath was unleashed on them. The footsteps grew closer, unmistakable now, echoing through the narrow hallway. Marcus's heart pounded in his chest as he glanced at Rachel, who had already shifted into tactical mode. She motioned for him to take cover behind a stack of crates near the wall, her eyes scanning every possible exit. They didn't have much time. Marcus was no stranger to danger, but this felt different. There was an urgency in Rachel's eyes, a mix of determination and worry that unsettled him. The building was silent again, but this time it was the kind of silence that pressed against your ears, the kind that made you feel like you were being watched from every corner. "Do you see them?" Marcus whispered, his voice barely audible. Rachel nodded, her gaze locked on the approaching shadows. "Two men, coming from the east wing. We need to move before they reach the main office." Marcus tightened his grip on his gun, the familiar weight of it comforting in his palm. He knew Rachel was right. If they didn't act now, they would be caught in the open, and they couldn't afford to lose the advantage. They had come too far. The men rounded the corner, their faces obscured by the low light. But as they got closer, Marcus's stomach dropped. He recognized one of them. It was Thomas Finch, a former colleague of Marcus's from when he had first joined the force. Finch had been a promising officer, but he had disappeared years ago, leaving behind a trail of suspicion and rumors. Now, seeing him in the middle of a Maxwell family operation was enough to send a chill down Marcus's spine. Rachel didn't hesitate. She pulled Marcus back deeper into the shadows, her eyes narrowing as she assessed the situation. The room they were in was cluttered with old equipment, perfect for hiding. They crouched down behind a large crate, their bodies pressed against the cold concrete wall. "Stay quiet," Rachel mouthed, her voice barely a whisper. Marcus was trying to focus, trying to make sense of the situation, but his mind was spinning. Why was Finch here? And what did this mean for their investigation? He had a sinking feeling that they weren't just dealing with the Maxwell family anymore. There were bigger players involved, players who had their hands in everything. As Finch and his partner passed by, Rachel motioned for Marcus to move. They couldn't wait any longer. The truth was close, but so was the danger. Every step forward could be their last. They had to act quickly, before the walls closed in around them. As Marcus and Rachel carefully maneuvered through the shadows, the weight of what they had uncovered hung heavy in the air. Each step was measured, deliberate, and full of tension. The walls seemed to close in on them with every passing moment, and the truth they sought was just around the corner. But Marcus couldn't shake the nagging feeling that they were being watched. They reached the main office, a large, dimly lit room at the center of the building. The door was slightly ajar, and Marcus could hear muffled voices on the other side. Rachel held up her hand, signaling for him to stay silent. She leaned forward, listening intently. "They're talking about the case," Rachel whispered, her breath steady. "We need to hear this." Marcus nodded, his heart racing. He had been a cop long enough to know when things were about to go south, and right now, everything was spiraling faster than he could handle. The conversation on the other side of the door was growing louder, more urgent. "They've got something on Maxwell," Rachel murmured. "We need to know what it is." Marcus took a deep breath, pushing down the panic that had been building in his chest. He focused on the voices beyond the door, trying to make out the words. "I don't care about the money," one voice said, and Marcus immediately recognized it as Finch's. "Maxwell's been untouchable for too long. We've got to take him down, and this is the only way." The other voice, deeper and more gravelly, responded, "You're playing with fire, Finch. If this goes wrong, we'll all burn. You don't know who you're dealing with." Marcus's gut twisted. This was bigger than anything they had imagined. Finch wasn't just an ally of Maxwell. He was plotting something even more dangerous. Rachel motioned for Marcus to move. They needed to find a way inside the office, to listen more closely. But it was clear now that the stakes were higher than they had ever anticipated. The lives of everyone involved were on the line, and Marcus had a terrible feeling that they were too late. They pushed the door open slowly, careful not to make a sound. As they crept inside, they saw the two men, Finch and his partner, standing near a desk covered in papers, some of which appeared to be confidential government documents. Marcus's heart skipped a beat. This wasn't just a gang or a family operation. This was something much deeper. Rachel's voice broke the silence. "You're planning to sell us out, Finch." Both men froze, spinning toward the door. Marcus could see the shock on their faces as they realized they were caught. "You shouldn't have come," Finch snarled. "Now it's too late." But it was already too late for them. Marcus and Rachel had uncovered enough to bring the entire operation crashing down, and now they had no choice but to act. The tension in the room was palpable. Time seemed to stretch out in that fleeting moment as Marcus and Rachel exchanged a quick, calculated glance. They were caught in a precarious position, but there was no turning back now. They had discovered the truth, and there was no way Finch and his partner could escape the consequences. "You don't know who you're messing with," Finch growled, stepping toward them, his hand inching closer to the gun holstered at his side. "This isn't just about Maxwell. You've crossed the line." Rachel's eyes narrowed, and she drew her weapon in a single swift motion, leveling it at Finch's chest. "Don't make us do this, Finch. It's over." But Finch wasn't intimidated. He took a step forward, defiance in his posture. "You think you've got me cornered, huh? You don't know the half of it." Marcus held his ground, his voice steady despite the fear racing through his veins. "I know enough, and I know you've got a lot of people out there who won't be happy when this comes to light." The silence that followed was deafening. Finch seemed to weigh his options, but his expression shifted, growing darker by the second. Marcus could see the wheels turning in his head. Finch wasn't just trying to protect himself, he was calculating his next move. Then, in the blink of an eye, Finch lunged toward his desk, grabbing something from the top drawer. It wasn't a gun, but a file, a thick redacted folder with a stamp that read, "Classified." Before Marcus could react, Finch threw the file onto the floor between them, its contents spilling out in all directions. "Take a look for yourselves," Finch said with a twisted smile. "You think Maxwell's the problem? You're wrong. This goes all the way to the top." Rachel crouched down, scanning the papers with growing horror. As the truth started to unfold in front of her, she felt a rush of disbelief wash over her. The documents revealed deep connections between the crime syndicates, corrupt officials, and a web of international interests that had been pulling the strings for years. This wasn't just a local issue. It was a massive conspiracy, one that even the FBI couldn't have anticipated. Marcus's mind raced as he picked up the folder, skimming through the documents. It was too much to process in one go, but one name stood out. His own superior officer, the person who had been pulling the strings behind the scenes. "No," Marcus whispered, his breath catching in his throat. "This can't be real." But as he stared at the evidence in his hands, he knew it was true. They had been working for the enemy all along. Before they could fully comprehend the gravity of what they had uncovered, Finch made his move. "You've made a fatal mistake," he sneered. "You think you've won? There's no way out of this now." Rachel moved fast, aiming her gun at Finch's chest. "You're under arrest, Finch. It's over." But before Marcus could secure the situation, there was a sudden noise behind them. A door crashing open, followed by a loud voice shouting their names. "Freeze. FBI." Marcus's heart sank as he turned to see a group of FBI agents pouring into the room. But it wasn't just any agents. They were wearing the insignia of the department's Internal Affairs Division. One of the agents stepped forward, her gaze locking with Marcus's. "It's too late, Agent Walker. You're compromised." Marcus's stomach twisted. He realized with growing horror that his own agency had been in on this corruption from the very beginning. Everything he had fought for, everything he had believed in, was a lie. And now, he was trapped in the very system he had once sworn to protect. Rachel's voice cut through the chaos. "Marcus, we need to move, now." With the Internal Affairs agents closing in, Marcus and Rachel made a split-second decision. They grabbed the documents, knowing that if they didn't act fast, this final revelation would be buried forever. But as they turned to flee, the agent from Internal Affairs raised her hand, signaling for the other agents to stand down. "This is bigger than you think, Marcus," she said, her voice cold. "You've been part of a much larger game." Marcus's mind reeled. He had been led into this trap, and now there was no escape. He wasn't sure who to trust anymore. His own agency, his colleagues, or even the person standing beside him. But one thing was clear. The truth was out there and he wasn't going down without a fight.